Thank you so much. I am very excited to be spending an hour with you guys talking about smart objects. They are one of those glorious features that makes Photoshop truly amazing. They are basically containers that store raster or pixel-based images, vector files, such as the ones you create with freehand or Adobe Illustrator, as well as camera raw files. And when you bring in those files into Photoshop as a smart object, Photoshop remembers all kinds of important information about the original file, including its file format and any superpowers that are inherent to that format, such as the ability to resize vectors or illustrations without losing edge quality. And you can also undo any changes you've made to content in these smart objects. You can, as you can see here in the graphic that I've made, I like to think of smart objects as a box that you can put all kinds of things into. JPEG, PDFs, EPS, AI, PS, camera raw, all kinds of good stuff in there. Smart objects are especially useful when you're working with raw files because you can trigger Camera Raw to open and go back in and tweak all of the wonderful sliders that you have over there in Camera Raw. Same thing with Adobe Illustrator files. If you pop in an illustration into Photoshop as a smart object, you can edit that illustration right here within Photoshop, or rather you can trigger Illustrator to open right here from within Photoshop. And then once you save the changes to that Illustrator file, they automatically update back into your Photoshop document. So I've got a little chart here of some of the smart object superpowers. So like we said earlier, Photoshop will remember the file format of whatever you bring in as a smart object. This allows you to do all kinds of wonderful things, such as resize content without quality loss. Now that would be for vectors as well as pixel-based or raster images. This is great when you're experimenting with the size of an item in a design or a composition. Smart objects also allow you to swap out content, and that new content will take on all the attributes that you applied to the original content. You can also handle repeating content. You can create linked smart objects or unlinked smart objects. This is incredibly handy when you've got a repeating element in a design, such as a shape, an embellishment, maybe a logo that appears small in one corner of your composition and really large in another portion of your composition. If you change one of those, all the instances of that element update at once without you having to do it manually, which is a huge time saver in production type environments. Smart objects also allow you to compress many layers into a single layer, onto which you can use Photoshop's tools that only work on single layers, such as filters and layer styles. So we're going to be looking at all kinds of really practical techniques in this hour today. So let's go ahead and get started by showing you how to open a smart object. Okay, so you'll see me using the mini bridge panel, which is shown here at the bottom of my workspace in CS6. If you're running an earlier version such as CS5, you're going to see the mini bridge panel open on the kind of top right portion of your screen. And if you'd like to open it, go ahead and choose the window menu at the top of your screen, then choose extensions and choose mini bridge. This just gives us an easy way to access all of our files. We don't have to, exit Photoshop to the Finder window or so on and so forth. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is how to open an image as a smart object. So I'll go ahead and close this graphic that I made. So we'll choose the File menu at the top of your screen and then choose Open as Smart Object. And of course you have to tell Photoshop where the smart object lives. So here's our first smart object, and I'll go ahead and expand my layers panel so you can see it. When you have a smart object in Photoshop, you see a little special badge that appears at the bottom right of the layer thumbnail. That's this guy right here. It looks like a piece of paper with a dog-eared corner with another piece of paper in front of it. Okay, so that lets you know that that is indeed a smart object. Now, I mentioned that you can resize objects all day long without losing quality, because when you bring an item in as a smart object, what Photoshop is really doing is memorizing pixel dimensions, how big that file is, so on and so forth. So let's say that I want to resize this guy right here. I would summon my free transform tool by choosing the Edit menu, then free transform, or I could simply press Command-T for transform on a Mac or Control-T on a PC, and Photoshop gives me these handy resizing handles. Well, if I shift drag inward one of the corner handles, I will be reducing the size of that file. And if I press return, then I've told Photoshop that I accept that size change. Well, now, what if later on I decide I need to make that file larger again? Well, if you've not used a Smart Object, you really would need to bring in this file again, because anytime you use free transform on pixels, the pixels get mushed around a little bit, so you're going to be losing quality by doing multiple free transforms on a single image. But not so with a Smart Object, because what Photoshop is really doing when we summon the free transform tool again right here to make this image bigger, Photoshop isn't resizing this small version. It's going back to the original pixel dimensions that we brought in. So you can think of Smart Objects as using it's like an instance of that image, okay? So now I'm resizing it back to its original size, and I don't have to worry about quality loss. So this is great for experimentation. Now let's look at another way to open a Smart Object. So when you choose the File, Open as Smart Object command like we did a moment ago, Photoshop is going to create a new document that contains that Smart Object. Well, if we want to add a Smart Object to our already open window, we can choose File, Place instead, and that will import another Smart Object into the already open document. So let's go ahead and choose another file here. We've got a nice hula dancer. So we're going to scoot her over here. And when you choose the File Place command, Photoshop gives you the free transform bounding box anyway, because it assumes you might want to resize that content. I'm going to go ahead and leave this content the same size. Press return. So that's the second way you can create a Smart Object. Now the third way you can create a Smart Object is by dragging and dropping a raster or a pixel-based image into an already open document. Now that feature was new in CS5, I believe, so if you're running an earlier version, that won't happen. So since I've got my mini bridge panel open down here at the bottom, I can simply click and drag from that panel into my document area, and you get a little ghosted sample of the image there. And now I've got the free transform handles again. I can press return if I don't need to resize them. And as you can see over here in my layers panel, all three of these layer thumbnails are indeed Smart Objects, and I know that because they have that little extra badge at the bottom right corner of the layer thumbnail themselves. So now I could bring this girl over here, and we've got a fun little composition there. So those are a couple of ways that you can create Smart Objects. Now you can also turn many layers into a Smart Object. So for example, if I wanted to run a filter on this entire composition, say sharpening, would I sharpen each layer individually? Heck no, that would take forever. So what you can do is activate multiple layers. So you click to activate the first layer, then you might shift click or command control click to activate other layers, and then you're going to position your cursor to the right of the layer name. Okay, so somewhere in this area over here, next to your edge of the Photoshop workspace. And if you're using a Mac, you're going to control click. If you're using a PC, you're going to right click. And from the resulting menu, choose Convert to Smart Object. And if you watch in the Layers panel, now I've got a single layer onto which I can run filters on. I could even do an oil paint filter if I wanted. Okay, I'll drop that down a little bit so we can still see what our images were. Now, your next question is going to be, well, how do you get back to those original three layers? Let's say you had some color correction going on in those layers, or you want to make size changes. All you have to do is double-click the layer thumbnail of the Smart Object, and Photoshop will open a temporary document containing all of the original layers. So you can come in here and edit them. I'll just resize these ladies here, move them around on my image so we can do something drastic so you can see the change update itself when we go back to our original document. So this is the temporary document that Photoshop opened simply to expand that Smart Object to show you all of the layers that it contains. You know that it's a temporary document because it's got a different extension than any other file name. If you can see up here in my tab, at the top of my workspace, the extension is .psb, and that stands for Photoshop Big, and that's just a temporary document. So we've made a couple of changes, so now let's go ahead and choose File, Save. This is very important. You do not want to use Save As. You want to choose File, Save, and then close that temporary document, and it goes away. And look how our changes are updated back in our original file. Now we're going to be doing that a whole lot through the next 45 minutes. So you're going to see that over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and close this document. Looks kind of cool if I do say so myself. And let's do something else that is very practical that you probably do day in and day out in your Photoshop career, and that is sharpening. So here's one of my favorite all-time images, because it has all these wonderful reflections, and it makes me think of my favorite photographer, which is a Hungarian named André Kertész. He died back in the early 70s, but he was widely considered one of the most amazing photographers of the 20th century. He was the first photographer to really capture shadows and reflections. So that's why I like this image. So if we look in my Layers panel here, let's see if we can figure out what's going on. Well, I can see that I've got a Smart Object right here. My image layer has that special badge, and I've got some sharpening going on. Let's go ahead and double-click that Smart Object layer to expand it, and let's see what's in there. Okay, so I double-clicked, and I can see that that just contains one layer. So that was not a compressing of multiple layers into one. So I can go ahead and close that. So let's open the original, and let's start over from scratch. So here's our original image. You can either remember to open it as a Smart Object by choosing File, Open as Smart Object, but I always forget, and you will too. So here's yet another way to create a Smart Object out of an already open image. So let's come over here to the right portion of this Layers panel, to the right of the layer name, and I'm being a bit adamant about where you click because you'll get different menus when you click in different areas. Okay, so let's go ahead and click near the layer name and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now we can come up here and do our sharpening in a non-destructive manner. So even if you're dealing with a single layer document, using a Smart Object before you run a filter allows you to run these filters non-destructively. So now let's chart up to the Filter menu, and let's go down to my preferred sharpening method, which lives in the Other category, and I'm going to choose High Pass. And the reason I like the High Pass sharpening method is because I've only got one setting to mess with. Unlike Unsharp Mask where you've got 3 numbers to try to remember, I've only got one here in High Pass. So this is kind of a down and dirty, foolproof, super easy sharpening method. The deal is that the High Pass preview over here in the preview window and in your document area is showing you all of the edges. So all of those little light gray areas are edges. So areas of high contrast. As we pump up the radius, that's an increase of sharpening. So all Photoshop is doing with this filter is accentuating or emphasizing areas of high contrast. So for this image, I'm gonna over sharpen it a little bit just so y'all can see a little bit more on screen. So I'm going to choose 2 pixels. This is a fairly low resolution document, so I would, if it were for real, I would probably only sharpen it maybe by 0.5 or by 1 pixel. So let's click OK. Now, when you run a filter on a Smart Object, the filter itself stacks up in your Layers panel kind of like a layer style. And the other great thing is that you get an automatic layer mask, rather a filter mask. So with this mask, I could hide the effects of whatever filter I ran, be that a blur filter, a sharpening filter, film grain, anything. I can hide the effects of just the filter. And if I decide I don't like the filter, I can just click and drag it into the trash can icon at the very bottom right of your Layers panel. Also, when you run a filter on a Smart Object, you get extra options for that filter that you simply cannot get any other way, such as blending modes and opacity control for only the filter. not layer opacity, which would control the opacity of the whole image layer, but we're talking filter opacity after you've run the filter. So to access those additional options, let's double-click that tiny little cryptic-looking icon to the right of the filter's name. It looks like two lines with little triangles beneath them. So let's give that a quick double-click, and that will open the filter's blending options. So from here, to use this high-pass method as a sharpening method, we need to change the blend mode to overlay. So let's click the blend mode pop-up menu and cruise on down to overlay. Why are we choosing overlay? Well, the overlay blend mode, which blend modes simply control how color interacts or cancels out color on other layers, where those two layer content areas overlap. Overlay in particular has a neutral color of 50% gray, which just so happens to be the color of gray here. So when I choose overlay, that gray is going to disappear, and all we're going to be left with are our accentuated edges. See, isn't that nice? And if I decided that that sharpening was a little too much overdone, I could drop its opacity right here. So I'm going to drop it way down so you can see how that affects the image. Maybe you can see that, I hope. There we go. So that kind of control is simply not, you cannot get that any other way. You have to use Smart Objects for that. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now if I decided there was some areas in the image that I didn't want to be sharpened, I could simply click within this white thumbnail, which is the Smart Filter Mask. So if I grab the regular old brush tool by pressing B, make sure my foreground color chip is set to black at the bottom of my Tools panel, I can come over here and hide the sharpening from areas that don't need it. So let's say, for example, she looked over-sharpened, and I could hide those areas of over-sharpening. If I don't want to hide them completely, then I could double-click the Smart Filter Mask and use the density slider. So by dragging the density slider to 30% for that layer mask, I'm hiding about 70% of the sharpening. So I hope you're beginning to see just how powerful Smart Objects are when it comes to filters. So let's do that again on another image, and we'll take it a step further. So let's open the image that we're going to create, and let's take a look at what is going on in our Layers panel over here. I see I've got a Smart Object here, and then I've got a Unsharp Mask filter that was run, and then the Smart Filter Mask itself, or the filter mask, has been filled in so that the only areas that that unsharp mask is being revealed upon are the areas that you see in white here. So that's extra sharpening for her hair and her arm to make the water and the grains of sand stand out. And I'll toggle the visibility off and on that filter so you can see. So there's the before. There's the after. So in this technique, we're going to take a look at using Smart Objects to do selective sharpening, which means sharpening in only certain areas. But let's go ahead and double-click this layer thumbnail to see if there's anything else inside that Smart Object. Give it a quick double-click, and lo and behold, what we've got here, since Photoshop opened our temporary document, we see that there was another round of sharpening already applied before we did the selective sharpening. So this technique lets you do what a lot of folks refer to as global sharpening, where you apply a certain amount of sharpening to the whole darn image. Then we're going to create a Smart Object out of the Smart Object so that we're dealing with one layer again, and then we're going to run another round of sharpening on it, and then we're going to use that layer mask right here to hide that extra sharpening from the areas that we don't want it to be revealed on. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this document, and we'll start over from scratch, Ola. So here's our original image. So let's go ahead and convert it to a Smart Object because I forgot to choose File, Open as Smart Object. See what I mean? Y'all are going to forget to do that too. So we're going to right-click or Control-click to the right of the layer name and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now let's trot up to the Filter menu, choose Other, or the sharpening method of your choice. I'm not saying you have to use High Pass. That's just my preferred method. And in this one, I'm going to go ahead and set it to, we'll leave it at 2. Click OK. Then we need to double-click the blending options icon to the right of the filter name. And we're going to change that blend mode to overlay so that that gray drops right out. So now let's toggle our visibility off and on. So there's the before, there's the globally sharpened version. Now, if we want to add extra sharpening, let's go ahead and create a smart object out of our smart object because we don't want to mess with this filter. Okay? The reason you have to do this is because you only get one mask per smart object. So if I were to add the selective sharpening to this particular smart object, then I'd also be hiding the global sharpening from certain areas. So that's not what we want. So let's go ahead and right-click or control-click near the layer name again and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now let's go back to the filter menu, choose Other, High Pass, and this time I'm going to pump it up quite a bit, the sharpening rather, because we're going to over-sharpen and then we're going to back off the opacity on it to make it look good. Click OK. Here again we're going to double-click the Filter's blending options icon and change that to overlay and click OK. Now we can come in here and use this mask. So let's go ahead and fill the mask with black to hide the extra round of sharpening. Okay, so click to activate the Smart Filter mask right here, and you know it's active because it has that bracket around the edges. Okay, so right now the layer content or the Smart Object is active. Once I click that mask, the Smart Filter mask here, which is a white thumbnail, now it is active. Once it's active, we can come up to the Edit menu and choose Fill. And then from the Use pop-up menu, choose Black. Black will always be an option there. Click OK. Now we have effectively hidden that second round of sharpening. So now with the mask still active, we can grab our brush tool, which lives in your Tools panel, the regular old brush tool. Just press B to activate it. Make sure white rather is your foreground color chip. So if you've got black and white color chips going on, you can just click that little curved arrow above them to flip-flop them, or you can press the X key. If your color chips are anything other than black and white, just press the D key to set them to the default of black and white, and then press X until white pops on top. So now we can come over here to the layer mask, and anywhere we paint with white, we will be revealing that extra round of sharpening. So for this particular image, I might reveal more sharpening on her hair just to make that stand out, certainly on her arm here. And you can see my brush strokes updating in the layer mask automatically. I might also reveal extra sharpening on her eyebrows, maybe her eyelashes. And of course, if you were doing this for real, you'd zoom way in and be real careful with it and all that kind of good stuff. Maybe another round of sharpening on her lips, which tends to look like lip gloss, like you're reaching into the image. And the great thing about these, the Smart Filter mask is that if you mess up and you reveal sharpening where you don't want it, let's say her teeth, all you have to do is press the X key so that black is your foreground color chip, and then you can come back across that area that you did not mean to paint across to begin with to hide that extra sharpening. Now, how do you remember what color to paint with when you're working inside masks like this? Well, there's a rhyme that goes black conceals and white reveals. So anytime you're painting with white, you are revealing what is happening on that layer, and in our case, that's that second round of sharpening. If you paint with black, you are concealing. So when we filled the mask with black, we effectively hid all of that extra sharpening. Okay. Now, if we decide that that sharpening is a little too much, do we have to start over? Heck no. All we have to do is double-click that little blending option icon, and we can lower the opacity of the second round of sharpening right here using this opacity filter. Now, of course, if you needed to get back, let's say, to the global sharpening, what we did first, then all you have to do is double-click the layer thumbnail of your smart object. And see, now we've got that original sharpening that we applied to the whole image right here. So we can double-click that little blending options icon and reduce the opacity of the global sharpening if we want. We could apply another round of sharpening here if you decided that that wasn't quite sharp enough globally. And then once you've made any changes, just choose File, Save from this temporary document, because you don't want to save it as another name or move it around in your hard drive. It's a temporary document that goes away. It does not take up space on your hard drive. So that's why you want to choose File, save, not save as. Then you can close the temporary document, and any changes you made over there will be reflected right here. So let's do that again on another image. I'll use an image that is comprised of several layers to give you an idea of how that works. So if we look in our layers panel here, we've got, let me expand this a little bit, we've got a levels adjustment layer that is correcting color on just the happy couple here in our collage. I know that it's only affecting the happy couple because it's clipped to that layer with this little icon right here. And then we've got the happy couple with a nice oval vignette mask, and then we've got the original beach background. So let's go ahead and activate all these layers by clicking one and then shift-clicking the topmost one, or you can just Control or Command click to activate individual layers that aren't next to each other. And now let's make a smart object out of it. So Control or right-click near the layer name, convert to smart object. Now we are free to apply our sharpening. So we'll go up to the Filter menu, Sharpen, or actually Other, high pass. And we'll set that to 2, and then we'll use the blending options to change the mode to overlay. So there's our global sharpening. Now what happens if we want to apply some selective sharpening to other areas? We simply make another smart object by right-clicking or control-clicking near the layer name, convert to smart object, and now we can do an extra round of sharpening. And I'll make this one really intense so it shows up. Okay, so now let's fill that mask with black to hide the extra round of sharpening from the image. Choose Edit, Fill, choose Black from the Use pop-up menu, click OK. So now that's all hidden. So with the mask still active and the brush tool active, let's flip-flop our color chip so that we're painting with white because black conceals and white reveals, and right now we want to reveal some extra sharpening. So now we can come in here and we can reveal the extra sharpening in certain areas. And I'm just trying to choose areas that make it obvious that I've done it for the purposes of this demo here. So that is all there is to using smart objects to perform both global sharpening, which means sharpening the whole image, and selective sharpening, which is going back and applying a little bit more sharpening to certain areas for extra emphasis. And again, if you need to get back to the original layers, all you have to do is double-click that smart object, and it opens one temporary document, and we can even open this other smart object to get back to our original layers. Don't freak out. As Photoshop opens these temporary documents, they're not taking up extra space on your hard drive. They go away as soon as you finish editing them. Now let me do something drastic to this so that we see the change reflected. I'm going to go ahead and add a color tint to this image by choosing the Layer menu, New Adjustment Layer, Black and White. And I'm going to turn on the Tint checkbox. I'll zoom in my image a little bit. Close that up. Now, am I going to choose File, Save As? Heck no. We're going to choose File, Save because we don't want to be renaming this document. We don't want to be moving it around on our hard drive. So File, Save, close the document. Here's our global sharpening. Okay, so let's choose File, Save, close that temporary document, and now when we go back to the one that we applied the selective sharpening on, all of those changes are updating for us. This is seriously working smarter instead of harder. So now let's move on and take a look at another handy filter, one of my favorites, which is the Darkened Edge Vignette. Okay, so we've got another smart object here in our layers panel, so let's give it a double click to see if there's any other layers in there, and lo and behold there is. Looks like we've got the original layer and a levels adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and create that from scratch together here. So here's our document, or our image rather. Now let's go ahead and correct it using levels. So we'll choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. And if you're running CS6, the math behind the Auto Levels button has improved dramatically, so try it. So I'm going to click Auto, and for this particular image, Photoshop does a real good job at bringing those colors into line. Now I would like to apply that darkened edge vignette. So I'm going to Shift-click to activate the other layer, Control-click or right-click near the layer name, choose Convert to Smart Object. Now we can come up to our Filter menu, and to create that dark edge vignette, let's choose Lens Correction. I will say if you're running CS4 and earlier, then the lens correction filter is hidden in the distort category. So if you don't see it root level up here, you're on an earlier version. So just peek in the distort category and you'll find it there. So let's go ahead and choose lens correction. Now in I think CS5 and 6, we got a new custom tab, so you'll have to click that. If you're running CS4, you don't have that tab, so you don't have to click it. But what we want to look for is this vignette section right here. And let's grab that vignette slider and drag it all the way left and click OK. So now we've got a corrected image with the filter on it. And again, if we want to get back to that levels adjustment for whatever reason, just double click that smart object. Photoshop expands the layers, and I can come in here and do something really drastic. Almost looks like a high key effect. Choose File, Save, not Save As, File, Save. Close the temporary document, and when we come back to our original document, we see that those changes have been reflected. So let's close that. We'll do it one more time on another image. Here's our original. It's got a little bit of a color cast, so let's choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. In CS6, click the Auto button. Don't bother clicking the Auto button in any other version of the program. I'm not kidding you. Horrible results. Or no results, basically. Okay, so now let's create a smart object out of these two layers. Activate all the layers. Control or right-click near the layer name. Convert to Smart Object. Now we can come up here and run our filter. So choose Filter, Lens Correction. Again, if you're using CS4 or earlier, that lens correction filter lives in the Distort category. And then in CS5 and 6, you need to click the Custom tab. CS4 and earlier, you don't have that tab, so don't worry about it. Locate the Vignette section, grab the Amount slider, and drag it all the way to the left, and click OK. So now you've got a nice darkened edge vignette, and if we want to edit that Levels Adjustment layer, simply double-click to expand the Smart Object, double-click the Levels Adjustment layer thumbnail, and make whatever changes you would like. Choose File, Save, or just press Command-S on a Mac or Control-S on a PC. Close the temporary document and your changes are reflected. Now let's take a look at one more filter that is oh so handy for saving what I would call subpar images or images that cannot be color corrected in any other way, but your subject matter is really important. Okay, so what we've done with this image is we've run CS6's new oil paint filter. Okay, so far this is the first thing that we've done that is CS6 specific. You don't have oil paint filter in any other version of the program. But nevertheless, let me show you how it works. So what we've got here, if I double click the smart object, is we've got the original image plus a levels adjustment. So you can see what I mean about the color not being so great. But it's a super cute photo, so let's figure out a way to save it. Okay, so let's go ahead and close those documents and do it from scratch together. So here's our original image. Trot up to the Layer menu, choose New Adjustment Layer, Levels. If you've got CS6, feel free to click the Auto button. If you don't, then you'll need to adjust levels manually. Now let's close that up. Now let's create a smart object. So let's Shift-click or Control-Command-click to activate the other layer. Control or right-click near the layer name, convert to Smart Object. Choose Filter, Oil Paint. Again, that filter is only in CS6. And over here, you can use these various sliders to adjust what your brush strokes look like. I'm going to go ahead and pretend that those are fine. Click OK. Photoshop applies the filter and gives you the mask. Now the only problem with this right here is that her face has now morphed into, it looks like that Scream painting, and that's bad. We want her cute little face to still be recognizable. So what we can do is click within that Smart Filter mask, press B to grab the regular old brush tool, take a peek at your color chips. You want to be painting with black because what's our rhyme? Black conceals, white reveals. So let's either press X to flip-flop our color chips or click that curved arrow directly above the color chips. And now we can come over here and hide that oil paint filter from just her face. Okay? And if the oil paint is a little too much for you, you can double-click the blending options icon and you can drop the opacity of just the filter. So now, in my opinion, that is a much more visually pleasing image than the original, simply because the artistic effect of the oil paint filter kind of hides the fact that the color isn't so great. Okay. Last thing I might do to this image is choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Brightness, Contrast, and pump up the brightness just a little bit. And that would be about it. But again, if you needed to get back to that Levels Adjustment layer, all you have to do is double-click to expand the Smart Object and make your changes. One more little ditty on filters. Using Smart Objects is the only way to run a filter on video in Photoshop. Now, video has been around for several versions, but prior to CS6, it was only available in the extended, or honkin' expensive as I like to call it, version of Photoshop. But in CS6, it is indeed available in the standard edition, which is really, really great. So just to give you an example, here is the original video. This is a shot of an aquarium, and I'll just scrub through so you can see that it is actually a video. But some of the filters that are really helpful in video are watercolor, film grain, and poster edges is another really great one. So as I'm applying those filters, you can see that it applies to every frame of the video. Okay, that is only if your video clip is a Smart Object. So let's go ahead and close that, and then I'll open the other video that I haven't done anything to. So this is just stock footage from iStock Photo, actually. And there's a special badge on the video, but it's a film strip. So that lets me know that this is a video clip, but it is not yet a Smart Object. So what I can do is Control or right-click near the layer name, choose Convert to Smart Object, and then do the filters. Okay. If you don't create a Smart Object out of your video clip, the filters will apply to the first frame of the clip, and that is it, making them the opposite of useful. So you can see that there's all kinds of fun little filters, and just imagine the possibilities on this kind of thing, especially for photographers. If you shoot weddings, can you imagine doing one of these effects on one of the wedding clips? It would be very artistic, very creative. Great extra product to offer to your clients. Okay, so let's close that and let's take a look at layer styles. Now I've got a little story to tell you, so I'm going to tell you my story first, and then we're going to create this file. So I've got a buddy here in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, who runs an Apple Macintosh service company. Okay, so he's a Mac consultant. And his logo for his business used to look like this. Okay, so this is what the power up screen kind of looks like on the Mac, or the power button rather. So that's the logo for his business. It's quite clever, related to Macintosh things. So that worked all well and fine until Apple changed the look of their icons. So whereas they used to be solid black, now they're using a gray color, a light gray color with an inner shadow. So my buddy took this screenshot of what he wanted his logo to look like. So starting out with black, what I needed to do was lighten it so that it looks like it's a light gray, and I needed to add an inner shadow via layer styles. Okay, so what he gave me was an Adobe Illustrator file. So let's go ahead and open that file. I've got it open for you here already. It is not the mermaid. The mermaid is for later. Okay, so here's my buddy's original file in Illustrator. Now another way that you can create Smart Objects is to copy and paste the artwork straight from Illustrator into Photoshop. So let's start there. Okay, so let's go ahead and click to drag to draw a box around our Illustrator artwork. Now I'm going to choose Edit Copy so that it's copied to my computer's clipboard. I'm going to come back over here to Photoshop. I'll go ahead and turn off that layer. And let's choose Edit Paste. Not Paste Special, just Paste. When you do that, Photoshop is going to say, hey, I have noticed that this is an illustration or Adobe Illustrator file you're messing with here. You might want to paste it in several different ways. What would you like me to do with it? So let's choose Smart Object. Click OK. The artwork comes into our document with the bounding box in case you need to resize it. I'm going to go ahead and press Command or Control 0 so that Photoshop resizes my image so that it fits on screen so I can actually see those control handles on the corners. So I'm going to go ahead and Shift drag inward to make it a little bit smaller so you guys can see the whole thing. Press Return. So now I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to do this really fast because I'm not getting paid for this job, right? It's friend favor. So what's the easiest way to make this light gray without the edges getting pixelated? Yes, I could have changed the color in Illustrator, but let's say you don't really know how to use Illustrator that well. Well, we can use a hue saturation adjustment layer here in Photoshop to lighten up that black so that it looks like it's that correct color of gray. So let's choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue Saturation. Grab the lightness slider in the resulting panel or dialog box, depending upon what version you're using, and let's lighten it by dragging it to the right. So that looks about like the right color to me. Go ahead and close up our Properties panel. Now, to create the effect he wants, which is this kind of look right here, I need to add an inner shadow. But what on earth layer do I add that inner shadow to? Remember, layer styles only work on single layers. So let's have a go on both of these layers. So I'll click my little Effects button at the bottom of the Layers panel. I know y'all can't see this, but what we're going to do is choose Inner Shadow. And for this particular one, I've done it so much I know exactly what my shadow needs to be, so I'm just going to go ahead and dial in those numbers here. But the problem is I'm not seeing it over here. And if I click and drag around within the image, I'm still not seeing it. So that's letting me know that that shadow is not visible at all. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Let's try it on the other layer, okay, our Smart Object that we brought in from Illustrator. So we'll click the Effects button at the bottom of the Layers panel, choose Inner Shadow, drag around on our document. I still can't see the darn thing. Why? Because the inner shadow is dark and this layer is black. So there is absolutely no way that I can apply that layer style and it come out the way I want because I'm dealing with two different layers here. What's your solution? Make a Smart Object out of those two layers. So let's Shift-click to activate the other layer, Control-click or right-click near the layer name, choose Convert to Smart Object, and now let's add our inner shadow. See, it's already showing up already, so I'll dial in my magic numbers again. And now we've got the finished logo. Okay, so incredibly helpful when you need to use a tool that only works on a single layer. You can compress all those layers into a Smart Object. Now again, if I need to get back to those original layers for whatever reason, let's say that gray wasn't the right shade, simply double-click to expand the Smart Object. Double-click to open the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer, and then I can continue to tweak the lightness of that gray. Here again, choose File, Save, not Save As, close the temporary document, and we can see the changes reflected. Another really great thing, we mentioned at the top of the class that when you're working with Smart Objects, you're really working with instances of a graphic or an image. Let's say that Mike changes his logo. Let's say he wants to get rid of this piece right here. Well, since I have imported that Adobe Illustrator illustration as a Smart Object, I can trigger it to open within Illustrator right within Photoshop. And then when I complete my changes in Illustrator and save that Illustrator document, the temporary Illustrator document that is, they will update themselves here in my Photoshop document. And I won't even be creating a second Illustrator file on my hard drive because what am I updating? I'm updating the instance of that image in this Photoshop document. So let me show you that, and we're going to look at that again here in a minute. So to get to my original illustration smart object, I need to expand this smart object. So let's double click it. So there's my original that I brought in. So we're going to control or right click near the layer name, and this time let's choose Edit Contents. That is going to trigger the original creation software of that image to open if it lives on your hard drive. I have Illustrator, so Illustrator is going to open. Oh, here it is. Oop, that's not the right one. That's not the right one either. Let's go ahead and close that, and let's do it again. Here we go, Edit Contents. There we go. So now we've got the correct Illustrator file open, and let's say that I need to delete that one part. So I'm going to click it and press the Delete key. Now I'm going to choose File, Save, not Save As, not Save a Copy, File, Save, because this is a temporary Illustrator document. It's not going to live anywhere on your screen. So we've already saved it, so now let's go back to Photoshop. Looky there. That extra piece is gone. So what are we working with? We're working with a PSB. That means this is a temporary document. So let's go ahead and press Command S or Control S on a PC to save it. Close that temporary document. And there is our updated copy. Okay, so very, very efficient way to work with this. And if this is a little too fast for you, it's all stepped out in my book, Photoshop CS2, The Missing Manual. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. It really is a great book. Quite conversational, too. It's easy to read, and it's kind of funny in places, too. So let's close this image and take a look at another technique, and that is to make a photo template. Okay, so here's what we're going to create. So we've looked at opening smart objects, placing smart objects into existing documents. We've looked at converting multiple layers into smart objects. We've looked at editing content in a smart object, which will open like Camera Raw if the smart object contains a RAW file, or Illustrator if it contains an Illustrator file, and you have that program on your hard drive. The thing we haven't looked at yet is swapping out content of a smart object, because it's a container. You can swap out content. So let's take a peek at what's happening in my layers panel here. We've got a black and white adjustment layer. That's where the color tint, the overlays come in from. We've got the image of the smart object. It's got a mask on it, which is giving it its rounded edges. And it looks like we've got a lens correction filter going on. That's where we're getting that softly darkened edge vignette. Okay, so now let's swap out this photo for another photo, and it will take on all of the attributes that we've applied to this one. What you want to do is control or right click near the layer name, and this time we're going to choose Replace Contents. Tell Photoshop where the new content lives. Let's choose this image right here, click Place. And when you do, that photo takes on all the attributes of the other photo. This is incredibly handy if you regularly have to process people pictures. Let's say you work for a magazine and you have to create columnist headshots, and you're constantly having new guest writers or contributing writers and so on and so forth. So you need to make sure that you apply the exact same treatment to all of those photos. You could do it once and save this as a Photoshop document and then give it the name, headshot template or something that's meaningful to you. And then when you get new writers, all you have to do is control or right click next to that original smart object and choose Replace Contents. Now, if you've got a photo that is not the same size, it still will work. So let me show you what that is like. So I'll go ahead and choose Place, and I know this photo is honking big. See, you can't even see his face. So what we need to do is resize the photo within this mask. So what I'm going to do is unlock the smart object content from its mask by clicking that little chain link icon that lives between those two thumbnails. Okay? Then I'm going to click the thumbnail of the item I want to affect, which is the photo, not the photo's frame. Okay? So now I'm going to summon Free Transform by choosing Edit, Free Transform, or pressing Command or Control T. and it looks like Photoshop is thinking that it's still the smart object that's activated, or the frame rather. So I'm going to click around in my layers panel and then click back on just the photo. Before I had an activation around the mask as well, and I didn't want that. A little bit of a bug with smart objects and masks there. So now that we have only the layer content active, now we can summon free transform. And when you're transforming a photo and you've got smart filters applied to it, Photoshop's going to temporarily turn them off. Don't let that throw you. They'll come right back as soon as you accept the transformation. So I'll go ahead and press Command-0 or Control-0 again to fit my document on screen so that I can see all of my corner handles, and then Shift-Option on a Mac or Shift-Alt on a PC, drag a corner handle inward, press Return, zoom back up so you can see the newly resized image. So you can still resize content even if you've done a whole lot of stuff and you haven't really looked at your images to see if they are, the same size or aspect ratio or what have you. Just remember to unlock the content from its mask if you have a mask, and then you can still resize that content. So very, very handy. Let's look at that one more time. Here's another image, great for wedding photographers here, photographers of any kind. Let's say you create this treatment. You've got the black and white adjustment layer. That's where our sepia is coming from. You've got a lens correction vignette turned on. That's where that darkened edge is coming from. And now let's swap out the content and apply the same attributes to another photo. So Control or right-click near the layer name, replace contents, come down to another image, and it takes on all the attributes. Sometimes these images, when you swap out content, will come in at different sizes, even though they're the same darn size. It's really weird. I do believe it's a bug, but this image shouldn't need to be resized because it is the same size as the original. But if you need to resize it, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and do that by summoning Free Transform. Press Return, and then when you do, then all of those other attributes come back on. So that is a great way to make photo templates. And yes, you could do that with actions, but actions are notoriously persnickety. Okay, if you get one thing wrong or Photoshop encounters anything that is slightly different, then your action will cease to run. So sometimes it is easier to create a smart object template. So now let's look at another way to use smart objects, and that is to bring in vectors for vector embellishments. So here's a photo, and then I downloaded an illustration and brought that in to enhance the photo. Okay, so let's take a look at how to do that. I'll go ahead and delete the layer I added. So here we are at our original photo. Now I want the illustration to come in as a smart object in my already open document. So we'll choose File, Place, navigate to where the illustration lives or whatever the artwork is that you want to add. Click Place. It's going to come in with the resizing handles. I'm going to zoom out a little bit by pressing Command minus or Control minus just so I can see my corner handles. And I'm going to mouse away from one of the corner handles, and when your cursor turns into a double-sided curved arrow, then you can rotate the image. So I'm just going to try to place the music notes so they look like they're coming out of the guitar. And then I'm going to shift drag inward to resize those notes, make them a little bit smaller. You do want to hold down the shift key, otherwise your artwork will get stretched and squished. I like to call that woppy jawed. So let's zoom back in by pressing Command or Control plus. Press V to grab the Move tool. And now all we need to do is hide the other illustration. So we've got our Smart Object layer active. Let's click the circle within a square icon at the bottom of the Layers panel to add a layer mask. Press B to activate the Brush tool. Take a peek at the color chips at the bottom of your Tools panel. You want black to be your foreground color chip because black conceals and white reveals. And now I can just paint across that other portion of the illustration that I don't want to use, and we're finished. So I'll show you that one really fast one more time, and then I've got one more thing to show you, and then we'll break for questions. So here's an image. Let's go ahead and import an illustration as a smart object. So choose File, Place. Remember, that lets you add a smart object to the already open document. And now let's navigate to where the illustration lives. It comes in with resizing handles. Let's shift-click to make that little dove smaller. Press V to grab the Move tool and scoot him over to the top of our guitar. I think adding vector embellishments to photographs is really a lot of fun. It produces a striking image that can really capture people's attention. So we'll close that. And last but not least, I want to show you a little ditty on linked versus unlinked smart objects. So I'm going to come down to where my demo lives here. So here's our mermaids. You'll notice that over here in the Layers panel, all of these layers are smart objects. We know that because they have that badge. But what I'm going to do is show you the difference between linked smart objects, wherein if you change something on one of them, if you change the content on one of them, it updates every instance, versus unlinked smart objects, wherein if you change the content of one, the others do not change. So let's go ahead and delete all these layers. And we're going to start by choosing File Place to bring in our first mermaid. I believe this is her. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to make her a little bit bigger. There we go. Now I'm going to duplicate this smart object. When you duplicate smart objects, you are creating linked smart objects. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and press Command or Control J to duplicate that smart object. Summon Free Transform by pressing Command or Control T. Press and hold my Shift Option on a Mac or Shift Alt on a PC to make her smaller. Click within the box and scoot her over to the right side, or the left side rather. Press Return. Now I'm going to duplicate that smart object by pressing Command or Control J and use the Move tool to scoot her over. So we've got 3 mermaids here. Now, while they are linked smart objects, there are certain things that you can do to them that do not trigger a change in the other smart objects. That is using Free Transform, which you just saw me do, as well as changing layer opacity. So I'm going to go ahead and Shift-click to activate the other smallish mermaid layer and drop the opacity on both of them. Okay, so you can see that the original mermaid, is not changing even though they're linked. Linked smart objects, if you change the content of the smart object, that will trigger a change through all of the linked smart objects. For example, if our art director or our client says, yeah, I really like the mermaid but not the star, then let's Control or right-click on any of these smart objects. Next to the layer name, choose Edit Contents. We still got other file open there, so let's close that first. Now choose Edit Contents, and our mermaid should open. There we go. Let's click to try to get rid of that star. All the rest of the mermaid activated, so I can tell that the artist who created this grouped it together. So I'm going to choose Object Ungroup. Now when I click off of it and click back on that star, I should get only the star. Now I can delete that star, choose File, Save, close the Illustrator document, and when I click back over to Photoshop, you can see that the star goes away. So those are linked smart objects. If I did not want that star to disappear on all of them, I could create unlinked smart objects. So I'll go ahead and undo that last thing that I did by pressing Command or Control V. So now let's delete those other 2 layers that I made. This time let's create unlinked smart objects. There's only one way to do it. Activate the layer, trot up to the layer menu, choose Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy. I know, no keyboard shortcut even, though you could create one yourself using, the keyboard shortcut settings under the Edit menu. So now we've got another mermaid that is not linked to the first. So let's resize her, scoot her over, change her opacity. Okay. Now let's duplicate that one, just a straight duplicate. Okay, so this one is going to be a linked smart object. So we've got linked on the right, unlinked on the left. Now let's come over here and edit our contents again. To open it up in Illustrator, we're going to have to ungroup it again. Oops, there we go. File, Save. Close that document, click back on your Photoshop document, and you can see that the star only disappeared from one of them. So that's the unlinked smart object. Okay. So how is that useful? Well, let's say you've created a slew of labels or some kind of repeating content. Here, I'm going to expand one of these smart objects. This is just an Avery label template that I've used to create bottle labels for a friend's limoncello that he has. So if I double-click one of those smart objects, I can see all the original elements. Well, if I want to make a change, let's say Guillermo is now making, limoncello with passion fruit instead of lemons, I can come in here and swap out the content of that one layer, find my passion fruit image, resize it, come up here to my text, and we're going to call this passioncello. And then on my other text down here where we say organic lemons, we'll say passion fruit. Now what are we going to do? Choose File, Save. And watch what happens when I close this document. Remember all those labels that I had set up for the limoncello? Pow! Now they're all set up for passioncello. Now I know this has kind of been a quick down and dirty look into everything smart objects can do, but I hope you can see how versatile and how much editing flexibility that using them you can incorporate into your document. So if we've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Great. Thank you, Lesa, for an outstanding webcast as usual. We do have a few questions that have come in. And folks, we are at Q&A, so if you have not opened that group chat widget, please do type your question in for Lesa. Send it in so she can answer it while she's with us. Okay, we have a question here from Eileen. Eileen asks, Lesa, I want to create a template that has a series of 4 or 5 images in it. Is that possible, smart objects and templates?
Absolutely. In fact, here's an example. You can create your own picture package. Okay, so I'm not going to show you exactly how you would create that template, but what I've got here is probably a 5x7 and 2 wallet-sized images of my baby kitty, Sherlock. So you can set up something like that, and if you've created these as linked smart objects, changing one of those images will change the rest of them. So I can come in here and choose Replace Contents, and then I can bring in any other image, and Photoshop will populate it automatically. So I'll just use this one right here. That image wasn't the same size, but you kind of get the point that you absolutely can set up a photo template that has multiple images in there.
Perfect. We have another question from Guy, and Guy asks, on a percentage basis, how much larger is Smart Layer than a normal layer?
Oh, that's so funny. I don't know the percentage, but they do make your Photoshop document larger. And when I say larger, I mean the space that it takes up on your hard drive, as well as the memory, or RAM rather, that's required when you open that file. The jury is really out whether using smart objects produces a smaller file size rather than duplicating a slew of layers, but they certainly, at least in my opinion, they let you work more efficiently. And they can keep your layers panel very tidy instead of having, a layers panel that's a mile long.
And one final question here from Michael. Michael asks, Lesa, after using one of the content fill options to hide parts of an image, like a telephone wire, for example, I find remnants or ghosts of the wire in the final JPEG image. Do you think using smart objects would help this?
No, that would just, you need to zoom into your image and make sure that you have eradicated whatever the object is, in this case a power line. Smart objects wouldn't have anything to do with that.
Great. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Oh, just lots of comments saying thank you for another great webcast. Cool use of smart objects, they say.
Great. Well, I just got one more thing that I want to mention. I've got a series of free classes coming up on Creative Live. If you go to this URL right here, creativelive.com/instructor Lesa-Snider, or you can simply type in Lesa, LESA.in/CL videos, or just go to my Photo Lesa website. But I've got 3 free classes that are coming up. November 19th, I'm going to do a full day on bridge. On November 20th, I'm going to do a full day on blend modes. And then on the 21st, we're going to spend a full day making all kinds of fun holiday photo gifts. These classes are all 100% free while they are live. You just watch them in your web browser. So I hope you'll take advantage of that.
Boy, those classes do sound fun. And folks, yes, if you like what you saw today, and if you attend our other events, you know Lesa teaches some great, great things. And the ones coming up she told you about really do sound like a lot of fun. Lesa, thank you so much again for presenting today's webcast. Folks that attended, thank you for attending, and we hope you benefited from it. We do want to let you know we did push out some codes to you all in your group chat. Thank you for attending today. We have a great discount from O'Reilly Media. Save you some money on Lesa's new book, Photoshop CS2, The Missing Manual. You don't want to miss that. Lots of good information and tips there for you all. Again, thank you, Lesa. Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.